It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a Republican political strategist who you can follow on X at The Thomas Guide. John Thomas, welcome.
Hey, John, great to be with you.
So let's go ahead and start out with the governor's race here in California. We still don't have an official call from the Secretary of State's office that the November ballot will feature Xavier Becerra and Steve Hilton, but it's certainly looking that way.
Yeah, it sure does. It isn't beyond the realm of possibility that Tom Steyer does sneak into a top two, but probably not likely at this pace of the returns coming in. So this kind of landed, John, when we spoke a couple days ago, this landed pretty much right as we kind of suspected. Enough of the Republicans coalesced around Hilton to kind of make him the top person, and Becerra used the kind of last minute establishment play to kind of be the guy. And I guess it proves that money is important in politics, but not everything, because Tom Steyer now, I think, has burnt up over $500 million in his runs for office and has absolutely nothing to show for it.
What do you make of Tom Steyer's framing? He framed himself in this race as the billionaire communist, and he got a lot of the left-wingers in the Democratic Party to get behind him. He got a lot of the left wing on X and all the social media platforms, Hassan Piker and people like that. But what if instead of branding himself as the communist billionaire, he branded himself as a partisan Democrat who is a smart businessman and knows how to run the state more efficiently? Looking back at it, would that have been a better way to sell himself to voters?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure, John, that any framing really would have saved him, because the underlying political climate is so antithetical and against rich people, particularly billionaires, that no matter how he framed himself, it would probably be spun against him, because his underlying core identity is out of step with the modern Democratic Party. He's a whiter than white guy that kind of is not cool. And he's incredibly rich. And he made a lot of his money, in fossil fuels and other things that are the complete opposite of what the Democratic Party likes to consider to be virtuous. So I hear you, John. If he had framed himself that way, I think they would have, the left would have pigeonholed him as a corporate raider, just a big corporation guy. So he probably went where he thought would be the safest, but it just isn't believable and resonant that he believed his real position there. So it didn't work, and I'm not sure that voters really want a guy like Tom Steyer in office.
Was Katie Porter's campaign over the moment that video came out of her swearing at a staffer?
100% it was done. She just didn't realize it at that point. And the reason is that video confirmed the suspicions that some of the electorate had about her, which is that she's not a nice person, and she doesn't empathize with voters like us. And so it DQ'd her because it shined a light on her underlying weakness. It just exposed it. And there really was no recovery, because, John, she's not a nice person. She doesn't come off in interviews as nice. In fact, she kind of leaned into that persona when she was a member of Congress, with her persona in Congress that she wags her finger at you. So she was kind of damned once that video came out. I think she was the last person to realize that.
Why didn't she just lean into it? Because I think that Democrats respond well to Karens, and she is probably the chief Karen in California politics. Instead of trying to pretend like you're the homemaker that's baking cookies for your kids and their friends, which no one ever bought into with her, why not just say, yeah, I'm a nasty woman, and I'm going to go be nasty to all the people that you hate, and I'm going to make life miserable for them, and that's just who I am, and I'm going to kick ass and take names?
Yeah, that's what she should have done for sure. First of all, it would have been incredible, believable, and authentic. But also, Donald Trump did something similar, you may recall, in 2016, when people said he's not a nice guy, he's a bully. And he basically said, yeah, I'm a bully, but I'm not a schoolyard bully. I'm a bully for you. And that really stuck because the electorate wanted somebody who was going to, stick it to China, et cetera. And that worked, and we believed it. When Katie was running saying, I'm a nice person, it just didn't make any sense because everybody knew that to be untrue. So it ended up becoming disingenuous. I think the real root of it with Katie is she doesn't want to think of herself as not a nice person. So even though she isn't nice, so she couldn't lean into that too deeply because it would probably undermine how she views herself.
Is that common in politics when you've worked for people in the past, and I'm not going to ask for any names, who are not nice people, who are empirically not nice people? Do they know it? Are they aware of it? Or do they think that they're nice and it's the rest of the world with the problem?
100% of the time, they think it's everybody else, and they're the nice people. And sometimes you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. That's how they. But usually, it's pointing fingers at, oh, it's the staffer who's the idiot. It's always somebody else's fault. So yes, they're 100% in denial, and it running for office kind of attracts that persona, John, of like the egotistical persona. So it's a really nice safe haven because when you do get elected, typically you have nothing but yes people around you. So it kind of reinforces that you're the good one and everybody else isn't.
Matt Mahan is a candidate who had all the money in the world. He had profile pieces written about him in all the big newspapers. There was a lot of fanfare with his campaign. The tech industry wanted him to be governor in the worst possible way. The tech industry, as we know, really got kicked in the teeth all over the ballot earlier this week, not just with Matt Mahan, but there was a vote, and I think it was Monterey Park, to ban data centers, and other interests that they had on the ballot did not do well. Do you think that association with him was poison, and more poison than he ever imagined it would be?
I think it was a 1-2 punch, John. On the one hand, he positioned himself out of the gate incorrectly, which is that he's a moderate Democrat. And moderate politics just simply doesn't sell in a state as blue as California. So that was a disqualifier. And the second is, he wrapped himself around these people, these backers that are largely deeply unpopular right now in the tech sector. I mean, almost universally, from Republicans to Democrats to independents, young people to old people, they are all deeply wary for their own reasons of tech leaders. And so, it was doomed. And you saw Matt Mahan kind of toward the tail end in his advertising, he started to do like a subtle pivot to leaning into him being a Democrat by using the word Democrat in his ads on screen and whatnot. But it wasn't, voters weren't believing it.
Do you think Kamala Harris, who everyone thought was going to run away with this office, and people wouldn't be paying much attention to this election because she'd come into it with almost universal name ID, a fundraising list that could get her all the money that she needed to mount a very serious campaign? Do you think she's looking at this and thinking to herself, I made a mistake, I should have run? Or, oh boy, I'm glad I didn't put myself through that gauntlet of abuse?
I know the type, and I think she's segmenting it in two ways, if I had to bet. One is, she says, I could have had it if I wanted. I would have walked in and had it. So she probably believes that to be true. But I think the real core reason she didn't run was not because she didn't think she couldn't win. It's because she didn't want the job, because being a governor in the state of California is a lot of work. There's a lot of pressure, particularly as it relates to disaster management. And that's, Kamala's not up to that job, and I think she knows it. So I really don't think she wanted the job, because if she did, John, you got to think that she would have thrown her hat in the ring.
Steve Hilton is now trying to do something that no Republican has done since Arnold Schwarzenegger did it when he ran for re-election in 2006. If he were to call you up and say, John, I need your advice. What should I do? How should I run this race? What would you tell him?
Well, first, assuming the numbers hold and he comes in the first place, I think I would try to milk that, for as much as it's worth. Is that out of all those choices for governor, Steve was the number one choice. Secondly, you've got to spend time in areas of the state and media outlets that you're uncomfortable with, because you're going to have to talk to voters who normally wouldn't be part of the traditional Republican coalition. And so but before you go, and Steve is obviously a pro. He's very articulate. He's really good in interviews. He does a great job on your show and others. But he's got to come armed with third-party validators that different segments that are not Republican of the electorate in California trust. So the very first thing quietly he has to do is start racking up endorsements. I would try to go get them at Mahans. I would try to score a Democrat that nobody thinks Steve has any business getting, heck, it could be a Katie Porter or something along those lines. And then getting the chambers, law enforcement, et cetera. And he's got to go door to door in those communities, particularly with Latinos, and make the case.
What do you think we can learn out of this race for the upcoming presidential primaries? As Democratic candidates are watching the results, they're watching how these candidates did, which ones performed well, which ones didn't. Same thing with the Republicans. What do you think we've learned about the 2028 primaries?
Well, one is money is important, but it's not everything. That's clear. Second is you both have to have a message on the Democratic side, and this has been consistent, I think, for a few cycles. Democrats value identity more than they do message and policy. So the marriage is important of those two things. But if you're Gavin Newsom, you have to be looking at this thing going, oh man, I'm a white guy. Not much I can do about that. So he's gonna start out at a little bit of a deficit there. So I have to imagine, as you go into the presidential cycle, you're gonna see a lot of minorities on the Democratic side running. Republicans seem to make their choice based more upon merit and qualifications. On a messaging standpoint, I think we have to basically look at the Republicans kind of seem to come home to the favorite. I know, John, you were kind of mixed on, which Republican is the right, but it looks like Steve kind of was always the guy. And then the other, John, is we've got to be disciplined on message. Domestic issues are the big issues. I think we really, as Republicans, have to be careful not to stray away and talk about foreign policy. They have to talk about domestic things like jobs, et cetera. And then the last thing, John, is we can't ignore the populist wave against AI. That is a big sensitivity issue, and it also wraps around an affordability and an energy issue. Those are issues that our team's going to have to speak to try to ride that populist wave as we go into the midterms.
Let's shift gears here and talk about the LA mayor's race. Right now, we have Karen Bass in first, Spencer Pratt in second, Nithya Raman in third. Spencer's about 7 points ahead of her last time I checked. The betting markets, which had Spencer as a huge favorite to make the runoff, have turned on him, and boy, did they turn with a vengeance. They now have him at a 1 in 3 chance at making the runoff, and people are laying money down on Nithya Raman, leapfrogging him to the November ballot. Who do you think is going to be on that November ballot once all the ballots are counted?
Now, this is a really fascinating question. I've spent some time looking at the numbers to try to make heads or tails here, and I can tell you I'm not 100% certain of which one's going to make that second position slot, but I can tell you how I think you should analyze it. And the comparison. You may remember, John, that when Rick Caruso ran against Karen Bass, that on election night, I believe Rick Caruso was running ahead of Bass. But then over time, as more ballots came in, Bass overtook Caruso. And I think that's what the betting markets are kind of looking at, that from behind Democrat ballots to carry a Raman over a Pratt. Except it's not really an even one-for-one comparison here, because back when Bass was running, she was the only prominent Democrat. So almost the vast majority of late ballots that were Democratic were going to go to Bass and not Caruso. Whereas in this case, you have Bass, who's a prominent Democrat, maybe not a hard left winger, but she is a Democrat who's taking some of those Democratic late votes. So it's not a kind of a 1-for-1 for Raman like Bass enjoyed in the last round. So here's what I'm thinking. Right now, as the ballots updates have been coming in, Rahman has been picking up speed disproportionately to Pratt, except she has been winning on average when the ballot tranches have come in. Rahman's been picking up about 11% over Pratt. By my calculus, she needs to get about 14 to 16% per dump of votes ahead to catch up. So if the current trend continues, I think she'll come up about 2,000 votes shy of Pratt, staying in the third place. But here's the wild card, John. This is why I can't take a position. It depends where these ballots are coming from. If these drops of ballots are going to be coming from Democratic strongholds where there are just tons of Democrats, there probably are enough in those piles to allow a Rahman maybe to get a 20% ahead, a 30% on a batch approach, which could change the calculus. But as it stands today, if the returns are steady, it will tighten, but I think Rahman comes up slightly short. So it's a long-winded answer of we'll see.
And I can only imagine what it's like if you work in this business as a strategist and you have skin in the game with one of these campaigns. But as someone who covers this for a living, I cannot believe that we put up with this. I cannot believe that we allow them to take this long to count the ballots and we don't have an answer on election night. They can do it in a couple of hours in Brazil. They can do it in India. They can do it in these third world countries all over the globe. We are the home to Silicon Valley, and it takes a month and a half for us to count the ballots. It's disgraceful.
Well, 100%. And don't even wind me up about not having voter ID, because what happens, John, let's just hypothetically say that it gets down for a second place finish in this mayor's race down to 500 votes, which, I mean, it could, very well could. Well, then how do we know that those 500 voters were actual voters? We don't really know that. So my pro tip, both to the Rahman campaign, but also to the Pratt campaign, is right now, if you are Spencer Pratt, you need to be lawyering up and getting ballot watchers. Because if this thing comes down and you lose, slip into third place by a few hundred votes or even 1,000 votes, you need to go through those ballots and inspect them and try to ensure that that ballots with improper signatures, etc., disqualify. Because if you are shy just a few hundred votes, John, I've flipped plenty of elections in places like Orange County and others in local elections by DQing bad ballots. So, but there's a tight window of time to do that. And if you don't have the team and infrastructure in place, you miss the window and you can't go back and undo it.
Last question before you go. I would imagine that some of these late ballots that are coming in, they're provisional ballots. They are ballots that were dumped at the very last minute. Which organization is best at getting those in right under the wire? Is it the DSA or is it the Democratic Party? Because if it's the DSA, those are going to be Rahman ballots. If it's the Democratic Party, they're going to be Bass ballots.
It's a great question, and it's 100% the DSA. And we know that because we see it all the time in LA City contests. This is how a lot of the DSA candidates have bested the more establishment union-backed Democrats. We've seen it time and time again. They are better organizers. They're better ballot harvesters. So yes, you're exactly right. It would favor Rahman. And I have to think that there are probably some heavy tranches of Democratic ballots disproportionately that'll be released. And that'll favor Rahman, but she has to have that happen a few extra times. So look, if there were ever a scenario, John, where a third place candidate could sneak into second, Rahman has all the special ingredients right now to sneak into a second place.
All right. John Thomas, Republican political strategist. You can follow him on X at @ThomasGuide. John, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks again, John.